Hi, this is Keith Townsend, and you're listening to episode 12 of Virtualized Geeks Tech Talk. Today is May the 6th, so I think as the joke went, it was May the 4th be with you, and then 2 days later, the return of the sis. I got a little chuckle out of it. It wasn't that bad of a joke. But tonight's topic is about virtualization labs. I don't know if I did a podcast on virtualization labs. VirtualizedGeek is primarily a blog about virtualization, so it'd be nice to get in some discussions around virtualization labs in general. Good buddy of mine, Greg Greenlee, over at Blacks in Technology. I encourage you to take a look at their website or their forum. By all means, don't feel ashamed if you're not black. It's still a great website. I spent a lot of times over at the community there. It's a really great community of technologists, people who are seasoned in their careers, a little bit beyond me and a little bit under me. People who are just getting started. It's a great technology forum, one of the hidden gems of the web. I really encourage you to take a look at the forum. Those guys have some great things going on there. Greg recently bought a pretty bad virtualization lab. It's actually a single machine that he's planning on dedicating to ESXi and running nested virtual machines on. So if you go back to virtualizedgeek.com, I think the tag is probably VMware Workstation, or if you search VMware, there's quite a few labs, anywhere from running Zen Desktop inside of ESXi or running Zen Desktop inside of a single workstation. It's pretty cool stuff if you're getting introduced to virtualization, or even if you're a seasoned virtualization professional and you want to build a lab at home. VMware Workstation is extremely capable and allows you to do a lot of virtualization. And virtualization not just within the VMware world. I try and stay as neutral as possible to virtualization solutions. I think I've gone on record in saying in most solutions I like to go with Zen Desktop for VDI versus VMware View. If there's price considerations, VMware View is a very good solution. But if you're a large enterprise, I kind of lean towards the management tools of Zen Desktop. A good buddy of mine's has sworn up and down that the latest version of VMware View is most definitely up to snuff and ready to compete head on with Zen Desktop. So, I'm anxious to take a look at it. Haven't really had time to do so. But again, with VMware Workstation, you can do things like that. I've ran an entire Zen Desktop lab inside of my single workstation. I think I've done it both on a laptop and on a really beefy workstation. I've also ran VDI in a box, which is another solution that Citrix bought, which was an independent company. Citrix bought them, and it was an independent company that had a independent solution called VDI in a box. Citrix has since positioned it as more of its entry-level VDI solution, but it's really cool, and you again do it within just a single workstation. So, let's talk about workstations. Greg bought a pretty robust workstation. I think it has 16 gig of RAM. He has he might have said he had a 120 gig system drive and several SCSI, I think 3 SCSI drives for his basically VMs. He's having a little trouble getting ESXi to recognize the RAID, but my system, actually I have two. I have 3. One I'm trying to get rid of. The first system is my Dell SPS 15 laptop. It's actually a laptop with an i7 processor. I believe the base is a 2 gigahertz processor. This is the first laptop that I attempted to do the VDI within workstation with. It has 16 gig of RAM, the 7200 RPM spinning drive, i7 processor, of course, that supports Intel VT technology in order to do the nested VMs. So again, the concept of nested VMs, I think I explained it before, but the ideal is that you have a hypervisor such as VMware Workstation, then you install a secondary hypervisor such as ESXi, and then once you install ESXi, you can then install VMs running underneath ESXi. I hinted earlier to being vendor agnostic basically in my labs and my designs. One of the designs for my labs, probably the most popular post on, still the most popular post on VirtualizedGeek, is running Hyper-V inside a VMware Workstation with the Hyper-V running an instance of 64-bit Windows 8. Really cool lab. Very much not VMware specific. The goal of the lab was for me to learn a little bit more about Hyper-V and Windows 8. So on this laptop that has 16 gig of RAM, actually I did it on a laptop that actually only had 8 gig of RAM. We go back to kind of where the true bottleneck is in virtualization. It's almost always going to be I/O, whether it's network I/O or memory constraints or storage constraints. I always say buy as much memory as you can afford, then ask for a little bit more money when it comes to memory, and then buy as fast disk you can afford, then ask for more money for faster disk. If you get the fastest disk, generally speaking, my rule of thumb, get as much RAM as you can afford, and you get as much as fast or as many hard drives as you can afford, then your virtualization solutions, whether it's an at-home lab or in production, will basically rock, for lack of a better term. So what I learned in all of my VDI labs is that the bottleneck almost always was either RAM or hard disk, and not necessarily in that order. So I mentioned that I had the Windows server with Hyper-V running Windows 8 inside of VMware Workstation. The bottleneck was a combination of memory, but most definitely disk. Disk I/O, I had a lot of disk thrashing because I didn't have enough memory, and also because I had slow disk. I ran the same lab actually on my, I have a brand new Mac Pro with Retina display, the 13-inch. It has 8 gig of RAM and an SSD drive. The SSD drive made a huge difference in performance. All three levels. So my obviously my workstation that's running Mac OS 10 still usable. My Windows server running Hyper-V still a usable instance, and Windows 8 usable instance. And this is in a system with only 8 gig of RAM versus on my laptop with 16 gig of RAM, but with a spinning disk. So disk I/O again makes a huge difference in virtualization, and the lab kind of bears out reality when you look at VDI solutions, where you're looking at virtualizing data centers. Disk I/O and memory constraints are probably one of the biggest things that you want to look at, and then networking. And then, believe it or not, one of the trailing issues is almost always CPU. Modern day CPUs have extremely great performance, and especially for virtualized workloads, the constraints are rarely have I in the past few years found that CPU has been the constraint for a virtualized environment. So again, if you're looking at doing a virtualization lab, the requirements are pretty basic. Most modern day processors that support either AMD or Intel VT technology will do the trick. So that's usually your i5s, i7s, or any variants of those two platforms. I don't think I've seen many i3s in the market anymore. I haven't paid too much attention to it, but I think most entry-level laptops or desktops most definitely come with i5 processors. Obviously, if you're looking at a server-class machine, you can get a server-class machine, and most server-class machines support virtualization technology. Disk I/O or disk subsystem, you want to look at, I think starting off, you most definitely want to look at SSD, some type of SSD configuration, whether it's a rated SD configuration, which would be really cool, or a basic 2 or 3 drive RAID for your system disk. My main virtualization lab is a Dell 8500, which I'll provide a link to in the show notes on virtualizedgeek.com. Is a workstation with 32 gig of RAM, a SSD system disk, and I believe two 2 terabyte drives in a RAID configuration. So it's my not only is it my virtualization lab, but also run a Windows Home server on it indefinitely. It never shuts down, and I never even notice it running in the background. I don't even bother to shut it down when I do some of my heaviest hitting labs. So you most definitely can build a virtualization lab with just consumer grade equipment. It would be really great if you can afford a Mac Pro with Retina display. You'll be really happy with it. Basically, the SSD really makes the labs rock. If you have any questions about labs or virtualization in general, I encourage you to take a look at virtualizedgeek.com or any of my YouTube videos. I think I have a few videos down here that talk about virtualization in general, introduction to virtualization, and of course some of the labs that I've discussed in the video. Again, thanks for watching. Talk to you guys next week.